Without this one rocket, the International Space Station as we know it today simply wouldn't exist. That's not an exaggeration, it's the truth. For 6 decades, this rocket has remained a backbone of human spaceflight, and its basic design has barely changed since the tense days of the Cold War. It's a rare marvel of engineering, not just for its longevity but for how it originated. Strangely enough, it was born out of failure, designed by a brilliant Soviet engineer who initially failed at building a nuclear missile. And yet, through that failure he went on to build one of the most successful orbital rockets in history. This is the 60-year story of Russia's Soyuz rocket, a machine whose legacy still propels astronauts into space. To truly understand the Soyuz rocket's origin, we have to travel back to the 1950s, during the height of the nuclear arms race. It was a dangerous time. The Cold War wasn't just about political ideology, it was about firepower. And the Soviet Union was determined to show the world that they had the technology to dominate. That meant building intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, that could deliver nuclear warheads across the globe with terrifying precision. At that point in history, the Soviet Union had a significant early lead over the United States in rocket development. They were the first to design and test a true ICBM, the R-7. But like many things developed in the Soviet era, their warheads were massive and unwieldy. A typical Soviet nuclear warhead in the 1950s weighed over 3,000 kilograms. That's more than 3 metric tons. To send something that heavy across the planet and into enemy territory, they needed a rocket with equally massive power and thrust. That task was given to one man, Sergei Korolev. Korolev is a name that deserves to be as widely recognized as Wernher von Braun or Neil Armstrong. He was a genius engineer, often referred to as the founding father of the Soviet space program. But few know he started his rocket journey with military ambitions, not peaceful exploration. His goal at first wasn't to send people to space, it was to develop a missile that could reach the United States. To do that, he needed to design a rocket that delivered maximum efficiency over a very long flight path. And in order to achieve that kind of performance, he had to go beyond conventional ideas. The key innovation Korolev leaned on was a concept called rocket staging. This idea wasn't new, in fact it had roots all the way back in 14th century China. The principle is simple. Rather than using one single rocket to complete the whole journey, you stack multiple stages. The first part of the rocket burns its fuel and provides the initial thrust, and then it's jettisoned. The second stage then ignites and continues the journey. This method dramatically improves fuel efficiency because you're not dragging around empty fuel tanks and useless weight. The Soviets took this concept a step further with something called parallel staging, a revolutionary approach developed by engineer Mikhail Tikhon-Ravov in 1947 and implemented for the first time in the R-7 missile. Instead of stacking rocket stages vertically, they placed multiple boosters around a central core, all firing simultaneously at launch. Once the side boosters ran out of fuel, they detached, allowing the central core to continue the ascent. This design allowed for maximum thrust at liftoff, when you need it most, and then a streamlined continuation to orbit once the heavy lifting was done. In Korolev's version of the R-7, the rocket had 4 side-mounted boosters, called Stage 1, and a central core booster, Stage 2. These 5 engines all used a mix of liquefied oxygen and kerosene fuel, burning simultaneously during the initial climb. Once the 4 outer boosters were empty, they detached, allowing the central booster to continue with just the remaining fuel. This innovative design not only reduced weight during flight but improved stability and fuel efficiency. And unlike other staged rockets, the central core could fire from the start of the launch until final orbit. No delays, no wasted time. But here's the really cool part. Those 4 side boosters didn't just fall off when they ran out of fuel. They separated in a beautifully choreographed move, pushed outward by gas bursts that sent them flipping backwards in perfect unison. When viewed from below, the detached boosters formed a symmetrical flower-like shape as they drifted away. This iconic maneuver is still known today as the Korolev Cross, a tribute to the man behind the machine. It's one of the most visually striking parts of any rocket launch, and even now it remains uniquely Russian. If you were to look at the bottom of the R-7 rocket, you might think each of the 5 boosters had 4 separate engines. But that's not exactly true. Each booster actually used one main engine, the RD-107 or its cousin, the RD-108, and each of these had 4 combustion chambers. The mastermind behind this engine design was Valentin Glushko, another Soviet engineer who, interestingly, had a long-running rivalry with Korolev. Glushko's design was bizarre by today's standards but incredibly effective. Instead of one giant combustion chamber, he used 4 smaller ones. Why go through all that trouble? Well, the answer lies in something called combustion instability. As you scale up a rocket engine size, it becomes harder to control the internal pressure and flame behavior. With one large chamber, even a small disturbance can cause the engine to shake violently or even explode. By splitting the chamber into 4 smaller ones, Glushko reduced the risk while still delivering high thrust. It's a concept still used in modern rocket engineering. SpaceX's Falcon 9, for example, uses 9 smaller engines on its first stage instead of one huge one for the same reason. So, the R-7 was powerful, stable, and groundbreaking, but as a nuclear weapon delivery system, it had its flaws. Its guidance system wasn't precise enough to reliably hit a target, and it took up to 12 hours to prepare for launch. That's not exactly ideal in a doomsday scenario where minutes can mean life or death. But despite its limitations as a missile, the Soviets quickly saw the rocket's potential as a space launch vehicle. The massive lift capacity, innovative staging, and flight stability made it perfect for carrying satellites and spacecraft into orbit. And that's exactly what they did. The R-7 was transformed into the Sputnik rocket, named after the Russian word for satellite. Many people think Sputnik is a proper name, but it's actually a generic term used in Russian for any object in orbit, whether artificial or natural. A moon, for example, would also be a Sputnik. The very first Sputnik rocket didn't carry a warhead. Instead, its payload was a shiny, polished metal sphere, less than 2 feet in diameter, equipped with 4 whip-like radio antennas. On October 4, 1957, the world changed forever. Sputnik 1 became the first man-made satellite to enter Earth's orbit. Its successful launch wasn't just a technical achievement, it was a geopolitical earthquake. The Americans were stunned. They had thought they were winning the space race, but the Soviet Union had quietly leapfrogged them. Suddenly, the world knew that the USSR could not only build missiles, they could send objects into space. And those objects didn't have to be peaceful. The implications were chilling, and the US scrambled to catch up, launching their own programs into overdrive. Just 1 month later, on November 3, 1957, Sputnik 2 launched. It carried a living passenger, Laika, a stray dog from the streets of Moscow. Laika became the first living being from Earth to travel into space. Unfortunately, the technology to return living organisms hadn't been developed yet, and Laika died just hours after reaching orbit. It was a tragic moment, but also a monumental one in space exploration. Laika's mission proved that a living body could survive the stress of launch and microgravity, even if only temporarily. It paved the way for human spaceflight. In May 1958, the Soviets launched Sputnik 3, which carried a suite of scientific instruments designed to measure cosmic rays, magnetic fields, and radiation in space. It reached an altitude of over 100 miles, a significant leap in capability. But the real game-changer came when engineers decided to add a third stage to the R-7 design. This smaller stage had a single-engine nozzle and allowed the rocket to travel even farther, far enough to reach the moon. That's exactly what they aimed for with Luna 1, launched on January 2, 1959. It was intended to crash into the moon, but it missed by a narrow margin. Still, it became the first human-made object to escape Earth's gravity and enter orbit around the Sun. That was a massive first. Later that same year, the Soviets tried again. This time, Luna 2 succeeded in smashing into the lunar surface, officially becoming the first object from Earth to touch another celestial body. Just months later, Luna 3 went up and managed to photograph the far side of the moon, a side no one on Earth had ever seen. At the center of all this success was the R-7 rocket, a machine that started as a nuclear missile but had evolved into the Soviet Union's ultimate space launch platform. And leading that evolution was Sergei Korolev, whose vision and determination laid the foundation for decades of human spaceflight. But we're just getting started on Mole. In the next part, we'll dive into how this rocket design transformed into the Soyuz program, a new chapter that continues to write history even today. The Soviet Union made remarkable progress in their early years of spaceflight, especially with the rapid evolution of their R-7 rocket design. But this was just the beginning. By 1960, they initiated the Vostok program, which aimed to send the first human into space. Vostok means east in Russian, referencing the direction rockets are launched to align with Earth's rotation. They used the R-7 booster with a longer third stage to carry heavier payloads, up to 4 metric tons. This included a new spherical crew capsule based on the Zenit spy satellite. It all led to a historic day, April 12, 1961. That was the day Yuri Gagarin blasted into the history books aboard a Vostok rocket, becoming the first human to reach outer space and orbit the Earth. It was a triumph for the Soviet space program and cemented their lead in the early space race. The Vostok configuration of the Ark-7 would go on to support over 100 satellite launches, remaining in active use until 1991. The pace of Soviet advancements during this period was nothing short of astonishing, as chief designer Sergei Korolev and his team continuously pushed the limits of space technology. By the late 1960s, the Soviets were already developing an interplanetary version of the R-7, called Molniya, which means lightning. The core stage and side boosters still matched the original missile design, but the third stage now featured a quad-chamber engine optimized for space. On top of that, they added a fourth stage with a restartable engine, essential for reaching planetary transfer orbits to Mars or Venus. From 1960 to 1965, the Molniya rocket launched several probes toward Venus, Mars and the Moon. Though the missions failed to complete objectives, they still gathered valuable scientific data. One mission, Venera 3, even became the first human-made object to impact another planet, Venus. Sadly, contact was lost before it landed, so the event wasn't fully documented. Still, the effort marked another bold step forward. After Molniya, the Soviet crewed space program entered its Voskhod phase, meaning ascent, or dawn in Russian. Voskhod rockets were essentially modified Molniyas with the fourth stage removed and a new crew capsule added. Voskhod 1 was the first mission to carry 3 people into space simultaneously, and Voskhod 2 included the first spacewalk, carried out by cosmonaut Alexei Leonov. Then came 1966, a milestone year for the Soviet space program. It marked the beginning of the Soyuz program, a new generation of vehicles designed for advanced space missions. Tragically, this year also saw the death of Sergei Korolev, the mastermind behind the Soviet rocket program. The Soyuz vehicle was a massive leap forward, larger and far more capable than any previous spacecraft. It had 3 modules: the orbital module with a docking port, a re-entry module with heat shielding, and a service module for power and propulsion. This design allowed longer missions and the ability to dock with other spacecraft. The Soyuz was still launched atop the R-7 rocket, now renamed the Soyuz rocket, a name that it carries even today. Despite the impressive design, the Soyuz had a rough start. The first 4 uncrewed tests were all failures, ranging from mid-air explosions to catastrophic launchpad failures. Still, the Soviets pushed forward. In 1967 they launched their first crewed Soyuz mission, hoping for redemption. But it ended in tragedy. Cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov became the first human to die during a spaceflight, after a series of mechanical issues followed by a parachute failure that caused the capsule to crash at high speed. This period marked a major turning point. Despite their earlier lead, the Soviet Union was falling behind the US, which had made significant progress with the Gemini program and was preparing to launch the Saturn V rocket and Apollo missions. The engineering scale of Apollo was unmatched. Yet, the Soviet spirit of space exploration didn't falter. They focused on refining the Soyuz rocket and spacecraft. By 1973, they introduced the Soyuz U with upgraded engines in its booster stages. It was still based on the R-7 blueprint but offered improved reliability and performance, allowing for continuous human access to space. The Soyuz U became the backbone of the Soviet space program, operating for an incredible 44 years until it was retired in February 2017. At its production peak during the late 1970s and early 1980s, the USSR was manufacturing between 50 and 60 Soyuz vehicles annually. This production enabled them to build and maintain their own space stations, from early single-module designs in the 1970s to the modular Mir station in the 1980s and 1990s. Eventually, their expertise fed into the development of the International Space Station (ISS), which still relies heavily on Russian propulsion and power technologies to this day. In fact, the first crew ever to board the ISS arrived aboard a Soyuz vehicle. And from 2011, when NASA's Space Shuttle was retired, until the first crewed launch of SpaceX's Dragon capsule in 2020, Soyuz was the only way for humans to reach the ISS. That's an impressive run. Since its first launch in 1966, various Soyuz rocket variants have launched over 1,900 times, making it the most used rocket in spaceflight history. The current operational model, Soyuz 2, still holds true to its R-7 roots. It has a new digital flight control system and engine upgrades but maintains its classic 4-nozzle configuration. This version even launched from the European Space Agency's Kourou site in French Guiana, marking a rare moment of deep international collaboration in space. However, that spirit of cooperation has unfortunately deteriorated in recent years. With growing geopolitical tensions and strained diplomatic relationships, especially between Russia and Western nations, the future of Soyuz as a shared space platform remains uncertain. We can't say what comes next for this iconic rocket. It has stood the test of time and carried generations of humans and satellites into orbit. But now we wait to see whether that legacy will continue or quietly fade.